Most people think they knew Andy Griffith. They watched him every week, laughed with him, and felt safe when he appeared on their screen. He played a man who always had the right answer, a calm and wise sheriff who never seemed shaken by anything life threw at him. But here is what nobody talks about. That man was not real. The real Andy Griffith was someone almost nobody truly knew. The life he lived behind that warm smile was filled with pain so deep and so personal that even the people closest to him could barely speak about it. By the time he took his final breath, he had already buried a son, lost the woman who loved him first, and spent decades trapped inside a role the whole world refused to let him escape. This is not the story of Sheriff Andy Taylor. This is the true story of the man who played him, and the tragic ending that waited for him, and the woman who stood by his side from the very beginning. Before there was ever a Mayberry, before there was a porch swing or a fishing pole or that famous whistle theme song, there was a little boy in Mount Airy, North Carolina, who was being laughed at every single day. Andy Griffith was born on June 1st, 1926, and from the very beginning, life did not treat him kindly. His family was poor, not just struggling a little, but genuinely poor. His father Carl worked as a carpenter and house painter, but steady work was nearly impossible to find during the Great Depression years. At one point, the Griffith family lived in a home with no indoor bathroom. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, that kind of poverty was impossible to hide from anyone. The other kids at school could see it clearly. They saw it in the clothes Andy wore, in the way he carried himself, and in the quiet shame that follows a child who knows his family has less than everybody around him. And those kids were cruel about it. School, the one place that should have felt like safe ground, became a daily trial for him. He was bullied, mocked, and pushed to the outside of every group. He was the kid who did not belong, the one other children turned into the punchline of jokes he never agreed to be part of. That kind of cruelty does not simply wash off when you walk through your front door at night. It sinks deep into a person. It shapes how you see yourself and how you expect the world to treat you for the rest of your life. For young Andy, those years planted something painful inside him that he would spend decades trying to either fix or bury. What pulled him through was music. He picked up the guitar and the banjo and discovered that inside those notes and melodies, he could become someone different entirely. He also found comfort in church, and for a time, he seriously thought about becoming a Moravian minister. He was searching for a community that would actually accept him, a place where he finally belonged. But performing turned out to be his real calling. At Mount Airy High School, he figured out something that would define the rest of his life. When he stood on a stage, people stopped laughing at him and started laughing with him. That one shift changed everything. He went on to graduate from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1949 with a music degree, took a job teaching at Goldsboro High School, and spent every night and weekend performing comedy monologues wherever anyone would have him. Then, in 1953, his whole life turned around overnight. He recorded a monologue called What It Was Football, and it sold over 800,000 copies. A simple schoolteacher from a small town in North Carolina had become a nationally known name almost without warning. He quit teaching immediately and never looked back. But the wounds from that poor little boy in Mount Airy never truly healed. They were just pushed down further now, buried underneath the fame and the applause and the bright lights. While Andy was still a young college student with big hopes and very little money, he met the woman who would become his first wife. Her name was Barbara Bray Edwards, born in 1926, also from North Carolina, the same year as Andy. She was a singer with a strong and lovely voice and a natural presence on any stage she stood on. When they found each other, there was an immediate connection between them. They both loved music and performance deeply. They both understood what it meant to want more from life than their small world seemed willing to give them. They married on August 22, 1949, just weeks after Andy received his degree. They were young and hopeful and ready to face everything together. Barbara was the steady force in those early years. Everyone who knew them during that time said the same thing about her. She was grounded in a way that Andy simply was not. He carried a short temper with him, a leftover from all those years of being bullied and humiliated as a child. Barbara had a quiet ability to calm him down, to bring him back to himself before the anger took over completely. She was there when he was building his comedy material late at night, there when the work was slow and the money was tight, and there when the success finally arrived and changed everything around them. She quietly set aside her own performing ambitions to support his career, raise their family, and hold the household together, while Andy gave everything he had to a television show that consumed him entirely. Because they could not have biological children, they adopted a son in 1957, whom they named Andy Samuel Griffith Jr., and everyone called him Sam. They later adopted a daughter named Dixie. Looking in from the outside, it appeared to be the perfect all-American family. But behind the warm image of the Andy Griffith Show, the marriage was slowly breaking apart. The show dominated the top 10 ratings for most of its 8-season run, and Andy was not just a star, but also deeply involved in production decisions. Mayberry ate up his entire day. When he finally came home each evening, he brought exhaustion and distance with him. Barbara had given up her own dreams to stand behind his, but the man she had married was now more alive on a television screen than he was inside their own home. The gap between them widened year by year until it became impossible to close. In 1972, after 23 years of marriage, they divorced. The paperwork said irreconcilable differences, but those two words covered something much heavier and much sadder. Barbara had been with Andy before the world ever knew his name. She was there before the record, before Broadway, before Mayberry ever existed. And still, it was not enough to keep them together. After the divorce, Barbara quietly stepped away from public life. She focused on her children and lived simply and privately. But life kept dealing her difficult blows. Watching her son Sam fight his personal battles in the years that followed was a constant heartbreak she carried mostly on her own. Then in 1980, just 8 years after the marriage ended, Barbara Edwards died at only 53 years old. The cause was listed as natural causes from an illness her family kept private. She had loved Andy Griffith before he was anybody, and she died largely forgotten by the very world that had spent decades adoring the man she helped shape. Andy made no public statement when he heard the news. That was never his way, but people who were close to him said it affected him deeply and quietly. She was the first person who had truly known him, the version of him that existed before the fame changed everything. And she was gone. After things ended with Barbara, Andy kept trying to find his way forward. In 1973, he married a Greek actress named Salika Kasut. She was younger, came from a completely different background, and brought something fresh into his life for a while. But the same old patterns followed him. His career demanded everything, and Salika had no desire to live the life of a public figure constantly in the spotlight. With no children between them and a growing distance that neither could close, the marriage ended in 1981. 2 failed marriages behind him now, and a career that had quietly fallen apart. Through the 1970s and into the early 1980s, Andy Griffith found himself professionally invisible. The Andy Griffith Show had been so deeply carved into the public memory that audiences simply refused to accept him as anyone else. Every new character he played got judged against Sheriff Andy Taylor and came up short. Variety shows flopped. Television movies came and went without leaving a mark. He had become a victim of his own greatest success, too good at being one character for the world to let him be anything else. Then in 1981, while filming a television movie called Murder in Coweta County, he met Cindy Knight, a young actress from Florida who was 27 years younger than him. He was 57. She was 30. What started on that film set became the most lasting and meaningful relationship of his entire life. They married on April 12, 1983, and this time something was genuinely different. Cindy was not dazzled by the legend of Andy Taylor. She saw the real man underneath all of that, the complicated, sometimes difficult, deeply human person that fame had covered over for so long. She stayed through everything. 5 years into their marriage, in 1986, Matlock arrived and Andy Griffith found his second act. The show ran for 9 seasons and brought him back to a whole new generation of viewers. Professionally, He had finally escaped Mayberry's long shadow. But personally, the hardest moment of his entire life was still coming. Andy had played the perfect television father for years, always knowing what to say, always finding the gentle wisdom that made everything right again. But real fatherhood gave him no such script to follow. His son Sam had grown up quietly in North Carolina, working in real estate and deliberately staying out of the public eye that surrounded his famous father. But Sam was fighting serious battles in private. He struggled with alcoholism. He battled substance abuse for years. These were not stories that made the newspapers. They were kept tightly within the family. But the battles were real and they were brutal, and Sam could not find a way to win them. In 1996, Sam Griffith died at the age of 38. No television wisdom, no gentle fatherly words, no amount of love had been enough to save him. The grief that followed was the kind that permanently changes a person from the inside out. People who spent time with Andy after losing Sam said he was never quite the same man again. He became quieter, more guarded, and harder to reach. The laughter that had always come so naturally to him was now something he had to work to find. In his last years, Andy and Cindy lived quietly on Roanoke Island along the North Carolina coast, far removed from Hollywood and everything that world had put him through. His health had been declining for a long time. In 2000, at 74 years old, he had quadruple heart bypass surgery. He got through it, but his body carried the mark of that procedure for the rest of his life. He also managed diabetes and high blood pressure. His mobility declined until he needed a cane to get around. The man who had once commanded every room he entered was now mostly confined to his home and his property, living quietly, giving no interviews, wanting no attention. He had earned his peace, and he was taking it. On July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith died of a heart attack at home on Roanoke Island. He was 86 years old, and Cindy was right there with him. Just as he had always wanted, there was no public funeral and no Hollywood ceremony. He was buried privately on his own property within hours of passing, quietly and simply, with no cameras and no crowds. The world mourned Andy Taylor when the news broke. They mourned Ben Matlock. They mourned the face that had felt like a trusted friend for so many years. But the real man, Andy Samuel Griffith from Mount Airy, North Carolina, had lived a life so much heavier and so much more complicated than any of them ever saw. He had climbed out of genuine poverty, survived a childhood that tried to break him, loved and lost more than once, and carried grief that never fully left him. He found peace at the end, in Cindy and in the Carolina coast he had always called home. That is who he really was. Not the legend, not the sheriff, just a man who hurt, who loved, who lost, and who kept going anyway. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share your favorite memory of Andy Griffith. And if you want more real, untold stories of the legends behind screen, subscribe now and never miss one.